Greetings, everyone.
I'm back, baby.
It's Jake Ciely.
I'm great. Everybody else sucks.
Oh,
Oh no! It's every nightmare I've ever had!
Excuse me?
It's time to check the link.
Pretty crazy, huh? But it doesn't matter because none of this has anything to do with the show.
You know what? You just made the list!
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
It's all in football.
Sure, we talk about it all the time. Really? No.
What's up, you ducks? It's All in Football Wednesdays with Jeff Ratcliffe. It's been a while, Jeff. The 3 days since I've seen you. We spent this past weekend in New York doing the Flex Leagues, part of what we were talking about the past 2 days, but what we'll continue to talk about today to give you advice for your home leagues. That's why we kick off draft season with the Flex League, so you can learn from us. But we'll talk in SuperFlex. We'll talk some regular as well as some of the news over the past 2 or 3 days that might move the needle. There's some interesting things, Jeff, that normally we wouldn't say, but there's injuries related and stuff like that. But as a reminder, actually, make sure you're following Jeff Ratcliffe, even though he doesn't tweet a ton. What he does, it's really good. All right, you're kind of like does more with less. That's the saying, right, Jeff? More with less, or something like that.
Quality over quantity.
Oh, yeah, we could just go with that. Quality over quantity. Thank you. You always beef up the sayings I mess up. So make sure you're following Jeff at Jeff Ratcliffe. Check out all his good work. If you're not part of The Athletic, theathletic.com/BetsTV. First month is free. Updating the rankings and projections this week. Actually, right after this show, I'm going to go right back to working on them. And we appreciate you. So we would appreciate 5 stars or subscribe, whatever you're watching or listening on or doing whatever. Help us get us out there for more people to see, although some people might not do that, Jeff, because they don't want to share with their home leagues. Do you get that a lot? Do you get people who are like, oh, you're so good, but I haven't told my friends about you because I don't want to give away the information for my home league?
I had somebody call in on my SiriusXM show today, like, yeah, I hope nobody on my home leagues listens. And I'm like, well, I hope they do, because I dig my job and I want more people to listen. But you know what? The thing about it, Jake, we talked about this last week on the show. We could be drafting next to people who, and we will be, who have our draft boards, our rankings, our tiers, but it doesn't mean they're going to use them the same way as us. So right. As far as I'm concerned, the more the merrier. And yeah, let people in your leagues tune into the same information. They may not use it the same as you, and you'll still have an advantage over them.
Yeah, it's like playing poker or playing sports in general. You could all be trained the exact same way, and it still comes down to how you implement that training. But that's what we're going to talk about. Jeff, before we get to the Flex League and your team and the SuperFlex and everything like that, there are 2 things I want to touch base with you first. One was a concerning wide receiver poll I threw out Monday with Chris Meany. And the reason I brought them up is because it's 3 wide receivers, all in similar situations. So it's DJ Chark with a new quarterback and Trevor Lawrence. It's Curtis Samuel with a new quarterback and new team. And it's Kenny Golladay with a new quarterback and a new team. The reason I brought up the 3 is because they're all missing time right now. We know how valuable this offseason getting rapport with your quarterback can be. If you had to rank those 3 of who you're the most concerned about for 2021, who would be number 1 and which are you least concerned about? Or are you extremely concerned about all 3 of them?
Most concerned about Curtis Samuel. The injury happened in June. He also had a stint on the COVID list, which now he's off of the COVID list, but not being able to get on the field. I also have a major concern that we're going to see a reversion in terms of how he's used. Is he going to now be used as a downfield threat again because he's back with Ron Rivera? Joe Brady figured it out. It was pretty simple. They all figured it out at Ohio State. This is what you do with this guy. Get him in space, let him use his speed. And he was really good down the stretch. It was like, wow, this is what Curtis Samuel can be. But I am concerned about that. Chark, it's close. It's close with him. The one I'm least concerned about is Kenny Golladay. The video shows a really benign hamstring tweak. It's a 2 to 3 week thing. Dave Gettleman is out there yesterday on SiriusXM NFL Radio comparing him to Plaxico Burress. And I mean Plaxico Burress on the field, which obviously was a very good thing, especially when he was with the Giants. He had back-to-back double-digit touchdown seasons. If he could be that sort of red zone presence for Daniel Jones, that is pretty awesome. And yes, missing time is not fun right now. But I have the most confidence in him, and obviously that's part of the reason why I took him as a 29th wide receiver off the board in the Flex League draft.
Yeah, I think that Steph just pointed out in the chat, you all answered differently. You all took a different person as your most concerned player. But so let me ask you, because the one I'm most concerned about, I wasn't initially with Curtis Samuel, but you bring up a good point where he's now nipping at the heels. Your least concern is actually my most concern in Kenny Galladay. And this is why. Like, I don't disagree with anything you said. What we know about Kenny Galladay is he's not a great separator. And the reason I'm most concerned about him is getting that comfort from Daniel Jones. It's not Galladay I'm concerned about. It's that by not being on the field with Daniel Jones, who through 2 years has already shown a hesitancy to throw to covered wide receivers, that's Kenny Galladay's bread and butter. Like, he comes down with those. He turns 50-50 balls into like 80-20 balls. So if Daniel Jones doesn't get that mental trust, that's why I'm a little bit concerned. Do you think that's valid, or do you think maybe I'm just overthinking it a little bit?
Well, he doesn't have to be open for a 50-50, or as our friends over at PFF would say, a 40-60 ball.
He has to be okay with Daniel Jones thinking he's okay to throw him the ball. That's where I'm going with it.
The thing is that Daniel Jones hasn't had a receiver like that. So I don't think we know exactly how he's going to throw to a receiver like that, at least at the pro level. And I really don't know much about his Duke receivers, to be honest with you. So at the pro level, though, who has he had? Last year, he had a downfield threat in Slayton, and then he had two basically slot receivers, right? Sterling Shepard can play a little bit on the outside, but he's a slot receiver who's undersized. He hasn't had an above-the-rim guy, and that's why I think that Gettleman quote was interesting, because that tells me that's how they want to use him. That's how they're envisioning him. That's how they want to use him. So that's where I think that the appeal comes for me. Now, Jake, if you were saying you got to draft him as your second wideout, okay, I'm out, right? I'm not doing that. But you can draft him as your fourth wideout if the draft goes right for you. So that's where it becomes intriguing. Now you're taking a shot on this guy as a flex who, if everything shakes out the right way, it's 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. I'll take that every day of the week. So my concern, it's not as high for him. Curtis Samuel, he needs the volume to really produce in that offense, and already behind the 8 ball with the injury. With the volume as well, with the decent amount of mouths to feed, I don't know if it's quite there, because he's going to have to. He's not a red zone presence. He's going to have to really, feast on volume. And we know as well that longer touchdowns are not that common, not anywhere near as common as people think they are.
Yeah, I was actually going back to Duke that year. I was trying to remember. He had Noah Gray back then, but that's a different Noah Gray. TJ Ramming was his number one wide receiver with 811 yards for everybody out there.
Wow.
Deion Jackson, the running back in 2018.
Yeah, I like Deion Jackson.
Yeah, I don't remember. Deion Jackson got a little bit of love back there. But yes, it was not exactly a plethora of wide receivers, talent-wise, that you would even concern yourself. Nobody knows any of the names, as you mentioned. As you see scrolling on the bottom, all if you're listening, all in code, the all in, so that's the code, ALLIN, code, get you 20% off any FTN package. So make sure you're checking out that. All right, the second part of information, Jeff. And this is one where we talk about offseason, everything looks great. Everybody does this, running with the ones, running with the twos, blah, blah, blah. Injuries matter. And Rashad Bateman is missing time, significant time. Now the news today, that being Wednesday, August 11th, when we're recording this, the news is weeks, plural, which now puts week 1 in question. So this has a waterfall effect, Jeff, because everybody out there was pretty much on the same page that Bateman has the most natural talent of any receiver on that team. Marquise Brown could be more of a deep threat, which would hurt him for fantasy purposes, because we're also talking about a very limited passing offense. But with no Bateman, is this Marquise Brown goes back up your board? Is just this more security, Mark Andrews, and move Mark Andrews back up towards the top 4 at tight end? Or is this the backfield is going to benefit? Or maybe even Tylan Wallace, who people forgot about they drafted later, just to deepen that wide receiver core?
Man, and Tylan Wallace coming off of an injury last year, I don't know. I felt like he was undersold in the NFL draft. But regardless, I don't think any of the answers are exactly there for me. What I think, and I hope, is that people now become so afraid of Rashad Bateman that I get him for free in like the 13th round. And I don't play him in week 1 or week 2. And yeah, groin injuries aren't fun. Neither are hamstring injuries for receivers at this time of year. You don't want to hear those. They can linger. But at the same time, if I'm paying nothing for him, then that's what I want. I wouldn't move Andrews. Andrews, it's not a matter of volume. It's a matter of touchdown efficiency, which it actually wasn't even that bad last year either. I just think a lot of times our expectations are way too high when it comes to touchdowns. Double-digit touchdown seasons, especially out of tight ends, are extremely rare. They just don't happen very often. So if that's where we're setting our expectations, we're essentially setting ourselves up for disappointment outside of like Kelsey and Waller.
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing too is
my worry about the backfield still remains that if you're really high on J.K. Dobbins, I love J.K. Dobbins. Don't come to me and say, Jeff, I know you're low on J.K. Dobbins. No, I'm not. I love him. I think he's phenomenal. But I also like Gus Edwards in that backfield as like a really quality second option who's going to get 130 to 150 carries. And they have a quarterback who has 150 carry plus like 150 carry floor, basically. So where's all the meat on the bone? They're not going to run the ball 700 times. So he has to have a Mark Ingram 2019 season off the charts efficiency to be a top 10 back with that sort of volume. That's where it becomes problematic. So I think ultimately, though, not moving Marquise Brown up, I'm praying that people get scared, like Jonathan Taylor, late second round, scared over Rashad Bateman. He falls down the board, and then we just scoop him up at value and realizing he's going to be a little bit banged up for the first part of the season.
All right, Saquon Barkley, round 2 scared. How about that? That as well with that one. With the Mark Andrews, are you just staring at me or did you freeze?
I froze. I
was going to say, wow, you were giving me the death stare there for everybody as they're watching the video. With Mark Andrews was already kind of a roller coaster anyway, very much Will Fuller like at tight end. So I'm with you in the fact that even if you see a little bit of bump, the problem with him was you get 7 points and then 20 and then 7 and then 20. So I'm with you there. I like J.K. Dobbins as much as anybody. People know that, but I don't even have him inside my top 10. So we're on the same page with a lot of these. There actually was one piece of news remaining, Jeff, before we get to the SuperFlex draft and strategies behind that and thoughts and everything like that. Let me just ask you, emoji. I'm going to ask you, give me an emoji. Give me an emoji, Jeff. You ready for this? An emoji when you hear that Darrington Evans is looking good in the Titans backfield.
I don't know if there's an emoji for not overreacting to a news blurb.
The rolling your eyes emoji. I think that's what it is.
I guess, but I don't want to roll my eyes because I think he's a talented player. You know, shout out to the App State crowd for sure. It's just, so I used to call it the Roto World effect. And obviously I used to work at Roto World, so I know what goes into all the blurbs. Now, obviously it's NBC Sports Edge. But Jake, I don't know if you used to get this, but I'd look at Twitter and I get this like tweet about some player who wouldn't even occur to me. And I'm like, why am I getting a question about this player? And it's like, oh, Roto World literally just blurbed about this player. It happens all the time. People read a blurb, they overreact to it. Okay, the offensive coordinator said he's going to see a lot of work essentially, right? Well, what's a lot of work, right? How many carries did he have last year? He had 14 carries? So if he had 28 carries, he literally doubled his workload, I mean, the guy who's going to see a lot of work is obvious. And even if that guy went down, I'm not convinced that Darrington Evans' role even changes. I do think he can fill that change of pace role. He's a little bit undersized. He's lighter than he's not like he's short, but he is lighter. So I think he can fill that change of pace role, but I don't think he's going to be anything more than just a passing down type back for that team, even if Derrick Henry went down.
Yeah, I was the roll in the eyes, and I agree with you. It's not so much the talent, it's the fact that why are we keep trying to play this game with who's going to complement Derrick Henry? It doesn't matter for fans like because Derrick Henry is getting his 300 plus carries and then touches a few more on top of that. And then the top 2 options in the passing game, which we're going from Corey Davis and AJ Brown to Julio Jones and AJ Brown. So maybe, like you said, if Derrick Henry get hurt, but if Derrick Henry gets hurt, then it's Evans and somebody. I agree with you. That's why I was saying rolling. I do like Evans as a talent, but we liked all the guys before that we went down a list every single year. Like, this is the year you want to get that guy behind Derrick Henry and just stop. All right. So let's talk the SuperFlex draft that you were in. You were down at the turn. If you want to throw it up real quick for everybody that's watching and kind of give everybody this. They saw it yesterday with Steph, who was drafted at the 8th spot. You were at the turn right off the get. I want to say your turn picks because this is an interesting 2-part strategy, Jeff. You went Kamara and Tyreek Hill. Nobody's ever going to complain about that. Everybody would love to have that. Hell, you're not getting that at the turn in a normal draft. The question to you is there's 6 quarterbacks before it gets to you. If you're on the turn in general, is the 5th or 6th quarterback being there? Would that have changed your mind? Because if you're sitting in a turn in a snake draft and it's not a 3rd round reversal and it's SuperFlex, there's a good chance that you might miss on the entire top 10. Fortunately, you got the last one of the top 10 quarterbacks. Well, the 10th quarterback off the board, but there's a good chance that you might be looking at the 13th, 14th quarterback by the time you get back around in the third.
But that's actually my strategy. So I was completely fine with that. I want to actually be outside of the top 10 quarterbacks. I don't think you need a top 10 quarterback or two to be competitive in a SuperFlex league. So what a lot of people miss with the strategy in general is, as those quarterbacks are coming off the board, like you said, I was able to do something that you probably shouldn't be able to do. Of course, it does happen in SuperFlex leagues, and pair up a guy who I have as number 3 on my board at running back. And we could debate the Derrick Henry thing, but whatever. I have him at number 3. And then I have my number 2 wide receiver. And honestly, Adams went right before me. If Adams was there, I was going to take Adams. So it would have been Adams. And if Kamara went, then I would have taken the next running back very likely there, just to pair those two guys up, because I have an objective that I want to accomplish. And one of those objectives really is to land a top 10 running back. Regardless of the format that I'm in, I want that anchor. I don't need to keep loading up on running back, but I do want that anchor at the position. So it wouldn't have changed anything. And you mentioned the Stafford thing. That was actually a conscious choice in case. I don't ever like to play chicken with the draft, and we've all done this before. Oh, I'll wait and see if it comes back to me. And you know what? Like 9 times out of 10, it doesn't come back to you, right? And then you get frustrated, and then your draft starts to unravel. So I don't like to do that. So my thought process was, in case there's a really long run and I'm stuck, like now we're like 16, 17, 18 quarterbacks off the board, I'm going to grab Stafford here. It kind of goes against my advice of waiting until at least 10 are drafted, but he was the 10th. And it was a very tough room. So you do have to read the room. And I shifted gears slightly, and that's why I grabbed Stafford in that next comeback for me.
Yeah, and so something you and I talked about over the weekend after your draft, you pair Stafford with Cousins coming back at the 5-6 turn. So at this point, for everybody out there, Jeff's draft is Kamara, Hill, Robinson, Godwin, and then Stafford, Cousins. So for some people out there, this is something you and I touched on last week, but I want you to say the entire thing again, but kind of emphasize your point, because a lot of people out there might have missed it. If not, hey, look, you can go to the YouTube channel and watch all these videos back, and you can even put it like 1.5 speed and watch us talk like chipmunks and get through the show really fast. But Stafford and Cousins, there's a lot of people out there, Jeff, who will say, well, you took Stafford, so you got the safe one. So I'm going to go and take a Daniel Jones or a Jalen Hurts or a Justin Fields or Trey Lance. The point being, the second quarterback is that boom or bust second quarterback. Last week, you said you don't like doing that. You want that as your third. So explain that again to everybody, why you went with Cousins, which a lot of people would sit there and look at the board and go, I would have passed on Cousins and taken about 4 of those guys with more upside.
Yeah, I don't really care about the upside. My objective is to keep pace with my opponents with my 2 quarterbacks, not necessarily try and hit a home run there. I love to hit home runs in 1 quarterback leagues, but in 2 quarterback leagues, I'm going to try and hit my home runs elsewhere. Running back, wide receiver, possibly tight end. We'll get into that. So that is the object. 2 high floor guys between essentially ranks 10 and 20. I was happy to get Stafford, who not only has the high floor, but the high ceiling. But Kirk Cousins, man, what does this guy have to do to get any respect for the consistency that he's had? And I am hoping now the secondary is going to look completely different this year. That's a complete overhaul. But I don't know if it's going to be any better. Like, yes, Patrick Peterson's there, but he's like late career Patrick Peterson now at this point. I'm hoping they have plenty of more of those game scripts where they're going to have to throw a little bit. Yes, Dalvin Cook's going to get the ball plenty, but I hope they have to throw a little bit here too. And, not too shabby when you are throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson. You still have Adam Thielen. Hopefully Irv Smith takes a step forward. I don't think it's that bad of a pick. And again, if I waited there, if I passed on quarterback in that spot, my objective would have backfired on me, because I would have then been outside very likely the top 20. I mean, technically speaking, it would have been 20 on the nose when it came back to me. But when we look at who went at 20 on the nose, I'm pretty happy I went with Cousins instead of Daniel Jones.
Did you just take a shot at Steph with her not even on the show? Is that what you're doing?
It was definitely a subtweet.
Subtweet for the Daniel Jones pick. All right. So one of the things I asked you, and you gave a very simple answer of nope. So we talk about this all the time. You go through your drafts and you're like, man, of course, hindsight is 20/20. You're trying to predict what your next however many picks until your next pick comes up. And as you said, 9 out of 10 times, it's like, oh, that guy that I wanted didn't make it back to me. So to go through Jeff's roster again real quick, we talked about that. Well, after Cousins, it's Golladay and Andrews, who you did get Golladay as your fourth wide receiver, as you mentioned. Andrews in the 8th round, took Deshaun Watson in the 9th. You don't get your second running back until the 10th round on Leonard Fournette. So I said to you is if you looked back at this draft and you looked at how some of these picks played out, like maybe you don't take Watson or maybe you throw Andrews back and take Higbee later or whatever and take an earlier running back, your answer was no. And I think that's a good question to ask you because a lot of people will look at your team and be like, wow, you have one running back and then a ton of questions. And I wouldn't even say a ton because you have 3 running backs. You're shallow because you only have 4, and you also have a lot of risk after Kamara.
Well, I think the place that you should be most willing to be thin at is your second starting running back spot if you're required to start 2 of them. So my race to the flex position, I raced and got to Golladay at the flex position. I looked at, Chris Godwin, who I've ranked way higher than 20. I think I have him at 17. So I got, several picks worth of value, like basically a half round of value on him. Golladay I have ranked at 21. I'm still not overly concerned regarding the injury. So 21, I basically got almost 2 rounds of value on him where I picked him. Andrews was screaming at me because the last tight end who came off the board was in round 4. What I will say on that turn right there, where Golladay and Andrews go, I had Trey Sermon lined up. Sure, I did. But longtime listeners of me, people who know me very well, I always say you should never be sniped. Like you'll never hear me in a draft say, oh, you sniped me. Because I had Sermon, but of course Sermon went right before me, so I had Golladay and Andrews as well on that board who were screaming out. Now, here's why I said nope, Jake. Sermon is the number 30 running back taken in round 7, and I take Andrews in round 8. Then when it comes back around to me, number 30 running back, by the time it comes back to me, only 2 more running backs were taken. So I am totally content. That meant I did exactly what I should have done in that range. The 2 running backs, Zach Moss and Raheem Mostert, who maybe Moss would have been in consideration. I know he's banged up now, but he wasn't banged up on Saturday. But Fournette, for me, I've talked about this a lot to people. You have to make a stance on the Buffalo backfield also, but on the Tampa backfield. Are you a Ronald Jones person? Are you going to put your fingers in your ears like Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber and go la, 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 not pay attention to what everything has shown us? The playoff stretch, 20.5 touches per game. I know people hate Leonard Fournette. I know people are still mad at him for that game where he was suspended and it was announced at 11:30 a.m. on a Sunday. I know people are still mad at him for the down season in his second year. I know that. But last year, he took a huge step forward. He's in one of the most potent offenses in the league, and I picked him in the 10th round. If he's even on the right end of the committee, he'll be fine as my RB2. And then I'm also sitting on Kenny Golladay in my flex spot. So no, I was completely happy, and I was really glad to see that basically no running backs went after Trey Sermon. So yeah, sure, I would have taken Sermon there. That would have been within the plan, but he wasn't there, so there's another plan in place.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that again because I really wanted to hammer that point that you were talking about, which is a great one. If you look at it, again, 2 running backs in 2 rounds is, if you look at the snake, which I was in, running backs didn't go as heavy as you normally see in most drafts. Like we've seen a lot, and we talk about it on air a lot and say, in the first round, 7, 8, 9 of the picks are running backs. In the second round, now by the time you get through the first 24, 17, 18 of the picks are running backs. That didn't happen in the snake. It was actually they pushed down and there was a lot more balance to it where you start seeing, you go through it. Yeah, thank you for throwing that up, Tino. As you look at it, like wide receivers are interspersed throughout this entire thing. And so you kind of have that thought in the back of your mind. This is why Jeff and I and everybody in the industry, we talk about playing the board and understanding your draft and adapting to your draft. If you sit there and like looking at the snake and you're saying, well, I can wait and take a run. Well, this is a little bit different because now the running backs were spread evenly and you couldn't have predicted like Jeff did. Now, of course, Jeff, we're not saying you're 100% and yet you nailed it. There was no chance that didn't happen, but you made the smart play. The smart play was we're entering a very risky area of running backs. And it's very unlikely with what wide receivers are on the board when you're talking about Devontae Smith and Robert Anderson and Shenault and Smith-Schuster and Judy. Like these are all names that were in the 8th round before that second and third or the first and second running back after Sermon were taken. So play your board and watch those runs because if this is where you go down tiers, you can kind of expect and predict these kind of things. All right. So more on, let's see, anything else from your team? I think we covered everything on your team. Oh, you know what? I'll ask you one real quick. Evan Engram, third to last skill pick because your defense was in the 15th round. Technically, Rondell Moore, we'll flip flop him. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, Evan Engram. I asked this to Steph yesterday. Tight end 17. Has the hate gone too far? Are we now at the point where it's like, let's not forget what Engram can do? We hated Eric Ebron for his drops with the Lions, which this drops are kind of a weird stat to just base look at the stat alone. And then Ebron goes and he's touchdown dependent and doing great things with the Colts and great things with the Steelers. 17 is too far for Engram, is it not?
I think it certainly is. I don't think that fantasy players give tight ends the benefit of the doubt. Everybody expects a tight end to just step into the league and immediately produce. And Evan Engram, he did in his rookie year, but it was because there was nobody else there. By the end of the season, he was basically the only guy. Now, last year, it was not a bad season. Now, I know people complained a little bit about how Jason Garrett used him. Hey, Evan Ingram's not Jason Witten, obviously. But he had triple-digit targets last year. 1 touchdown. That's the thing. People, really miss the point on that. Touchdowns are going to go all over the place. And one year you could have 6 or 7. One year you could have 2 or 3. But we don't want to absolutely hammer these guys. I think a prime example, I mentioned this for my home leagues. Now it's not tight end, but literally in 2019, I was pulling my hair out because I had people in my home league saying Aaron Rodgers sucks. And it's guys, and they were what were they, 13-3 in the regular season? I'm this dude does not suck. That take sucks. It's a horrible take. Oh, but look at his fantasy numbers. Bro, I don't care about his fantasy numbers. Cool, we play this game, and I love this game, but let's not let it mislead us to what these guys are on the field. And obviously, Rodgers comes back, and now nobody is saying he sucks anymore after last year. Bounce backs can happen when it comes to touchdowns. That's the point. Aaron Rodgers now last year maybe was on the other side of the mean, for sure, the other extreme side, but still the bounce backs happen. I think we're really missing it on Evan Engram. And, when we're looking at guys for upside, why would we not be considering him in this range? So for me, I could have went for another wide receiver, sure, but I figured why not? I'm certainly not guaranteed anything with Mark Andrews, so why not take a stab on a guy who I certainly would have drafted a little bit earlier?
Yeah, and you're already pretty decent. I mean, your top 4 wide receivers are never coming out of your lineup ever, unless you buys and injuries. So, definitely that's part of it too. Is where we always talk about just the bench using it for players that could break out, but also that's the other aspect of it that I don't think people pay enough attention to. Is sure, you could have, as you said, gone another wide receiver, but at that point, we're talking upside guys, which you probably would upside pick. Sure. Jalen Reagor, Paris Campbell, Nico Collins, those type of wide receivers. But at the same time, even if they break out, they're still not getting past your top 4. So you were looking at a potential trade chip this way. If Evan Engram breaks out and something does happen to Mark Andrews, you have Evan Engram to be able to play your tight end position, or you could even play one of them in your flex. So it just kind of gives you a little bit more workability going forward with your roster. Workability or word? If not, I'm making it a word. All right, Jeff, you get to choose this. Do we want to be positive or negative first? Are we going good or bad? Which way are we going first with the rest of the draft?
So I am a positive person. So I'm going to go
negative first.
I'm going to go positive, I guess.
All right, we'll go positive first. So I asked you picks you liked from other teams. We'll kind of touch on a team in general and then some others here, but Mike Randall, first 4 rounds is what you said. So Mike Randall, for everybody that doesn't know, if you haven't seen the board, there will be a link out there for people just listening on podcasts. You can see it, but for people watching a video, you will. You mentioned the Davante Adams pick. So sandwich with your Kamara and Hill. He went Adams and Kelsey, then Keenan Allen, then Terry McLaurin. Hasn't even taken a running back, but his first 4 rounds, you love those first 4 rounds for Mike Randall.
Yeah, I thought Mike really crushed it. I sat next to him at the draft because we did sit in order. So we were kind of, how it goes at a draft. You're always kind of chummy with the people next to you. But I really liked the fact that he resisted quarterback early. He grabs the elite wideout for me, the elite tight end for everybody. And then he still manages to get 2 more top 12 wideouts on my board, which now you got 3 top 12 wideouts. That's awesome. His running backs then beyond that, I mean, he overall, I think he really crushed this draft because his running backs beyond that, he gets Miles Sanders. I don't love Miles Sanders, but it's the 5th round. He grabs Myles Gaskin. I don't love Myles Gaskin, but it's the 6th round. Then, of course, he grabbed Trey Sermon. He was the one who grabbed Trey Sermon. And, maybe the one spot and he knew this and he was talking to me about it, where he definitely is weak is his second starting quarterback spot. But his first starting quarterback, Matt Ryan, fell like crazy in this draft. He gets him at 21. So, I said the first 4 rounds. Maybe it's the first 8 rounds for Mike, because that is a really solid group of players to get in this draft. Because, you saw it, Jake. You were watching the whole time. There wasn't value to be had in this draft. This was, everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody's sharp. And so it was hard enough as it was. And Mike was making it look easy.
He was. I think the biggest thing that comes out of Mike's draft, if you're looking at it, and for everybody that can see it, his second quarterback is Taysom Hill, Cam Newton, or Drew Lock. He might not even legitimately have a second quarterback. And this is a super flex league. So I like the start, when you get Gaskin where you got him. Maybe this is another one where, the hindsight situation is the Matt Ryan, as you mentioned, I also think was great value. But if he doesn't take Sermon, which obviously weakens the running backs, but if he would have double tapped there and went Ryan Darnold or Ryan Baker, Ryan Carr, Ryan, something like that, at least he would have had a second quarterback. And then he could have done similar to you. He actually could have sniped you. As you said, you don't get sniped, but he could have sniped you on Leonard Fournette there instead of Taysom Hill. So that's just kind of some of the things you look at there, or Cam Newton. Either way, whatever. You understand my point. All right. So besides Mike Randall, you also like Taylor at 212. You kind of, alluded to that earlier. Is this concern over Taylor with no Carson? Like, I know there's like new talk about Carson Wentz being ready for week 1, if not week 1, 2, 3, or 4. Let's just even say that Carson Wentz is out till week 7, Jeff. I have a feeling you're on the same page as me where that Taylor was getting way too much hate, even if Carson Wentz was out for half the year.
Yeah, RB11 is just too much, way too much, especially with what he showed when he finally got comfortable in the offense at the end of the season last year. People want to write that off and say basically the guy we saw at the beginning of the year was who he is. Well, just go back and watch Wisconsin for the 3 years he was there and tell me which player he is. It finally showed up. So, yeah, it was way too long. Scott Angle did a great job of just, hey, he's going to be here. I'm going to scoop him right up. Carson Wentz was at practice yesterday. Now, he wasn't practicing, but he was at practice not wearing a walking boot. Like, this is huge. Quentin Nelson now, apparently everything went well there, and their anticipation in the building is week 1 or week 2 for these guys, not week 7. But even if it was week 7 for Jonathan Taylor, I don't know. There's just a point where, it definitely goes too far. The fear, I'm not going to draft this guy. So like Warren Buffett said, let's be greedy when others are fearful. I had no opportunity to take him in this draft because I wasn't going to take him ahead of Kamara, obviously, or Tyreek Hill. But it was just great at 212. And I think anybody who's drafted here in early August, by the time we get to late August, you're going to look back at some of these drafts. If you took him in the second round, and you're going to be pretty darn happy about that. It's 1 quarterback leagues, that is. If you took him in the second round, you're going to be pretty darn happy.
Yeah, 100% with that. The Jonathan Taylor, I have a feeling is going to start creeping back up to where he was before. And just because people are so reactionary. It's funny. I was joking with somebody, and I clarified to make sure that they knew I wasn't joking them. But he was like, hey, can you update your rankings on the site? I was like, for what? You shouldn't be updating your rankings. There's no major news. Like Carson Wentz was the last major news. And probably I do have to update it now because I initially projected them out for about 8 or 9 weeks because they gave us it was 2 to 15 or something ridiculous. Whatever it was. I think it was 5 to 12. So I leaned more towards the 12, but I will update that. And I said that, and I clarified, I said as a joke, because like I was making a joke at everybody that overreacts. So like one play, one practice, whatever. And we shouldn't be really changing much. Pecking order, sure. If somebody beats somebody out for the wide receiver 2 role or the wide receiver 3 role, and that changes the situation. A backup role becomes a clear timeshare, stuff like that. But there's not much you should be moving right now. And you just want to save yourself from making those mistakes. And that's why I pointed out. So Will Fuller in round 11, I've been surprised by Will Fuller in general, Jeff. I don't know if people think the suspension is longer than 1 game or they got frustrated. And so I did an article that just came out today on The Athletic, by the way, theathletic.com/BetsTV. You can go read it for free, get an entire month for free. It's what I love to do every year, Jeff. It's dumpster diving. It's going to last year's trash pile where everybody's bitter and ticked off because somebody burned them. They don't want to go back. They said never again. And that's where you find your best value. So I don't know if Will Fuller, he wasn't in that article, but I don't know if he falls into that because people got upset that he missed games because of the suspension or whatever it might be. But I'm with you. I don't understand why Will Fuller isn't going higher. And this is from somebody that hated Will Fuller at the beginning of his career because it was 6 good games and 10 average ones.
And 10 missed games as well. You bring up a really, just to go back to, if you are watching this and you see rankings on a site and those rankings are like 6 days old, they're not, it's not that they aren't current. It's just nothing happened. Like, we don't have to update our rankings every single day just based on like the wins. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes people are like, dude, your rankings are like 5 days old. It's like, okay, yeah, it's early August, you know. Obviously, if they're 5 days old in season, we have a problem. But at this time of year, sometimes there just isn't, you know, enough information to change things dramatically. And that's even more true when you're in like June or May. You know, there's not that much that changes things. But back to Fuller, here's the point about this and why I thought the pick was such a great pick where he went. He was wide receiver 48. Here are wide receivers who went before him. Russell Gage. I think I could just stop the list right there. But Russell Gage went before him. Mike Williams, Corey Davis. Let's see, who else is before him? Gallup. Michael Thomas, who may or may not even play this year. You have guys like Darnell Mooney, like the number 2 for his team. I like Darnell Mooney, but should he be going ahead of him? Antonio Brown. He's the number 3 wide receiver on a team that could be like a 12 personnel heavy team. I'm not getting it. Will Fuller, yes, he's going to miss week 1. He brings that team an athletic downfield threat. And Jake, there were times where in Houston, he would literally take over games. And now he actually gets to play with a player who I guess we could kind of say is like a poor man's skill set of Hawkins in Parker. You know, he's not a guy who gets a lot of separation. He's a short and intermediate guy who could play above the rim, that sort of thing. But he does draw at least some of the attention to the defense. So now Fuller can kind of do some of his stuff. And then you'll have Waddle out there and Gesicki out there. And it should be a lot of fun. I think you could look at Fuller, even with the suspension, as a borderline wide receiver 3 guy. He's at 37 in my rankings. So to get him at wide receiver 48, wide receiver 37 went in the 9th round. So you're getting 2 full rounds of value on this guy. I thought it was a tremendous pick.
I agree with you. And let me ask you this. This is one of the off-season news pieces that you may or may not. Are you interested in along the lines of that Jalen Waddle might not be a factor for a while, that this whole report of bringing him along slowly because he's still not 100% from the injury we saw last year in college? Like, are you buying into that at all? Because Devontae Parker's not actually been a picture of health either, and he's dealing with something right now, as well as he had the hamstring at the beginning and the end of last season. So let me put it this way. Who do you think is the second most? We all think it's Will. Well, not we, but you and I both think it's Will Fuller. Who's the second more valuable wide receiver? Is it going to be Devontae Parker or Jalen Waddle, or do you just not care? You're not drafting either one of them.
Well, I think I found myself taking Parker at points, realizing it's a touchdown play, really. I'm not playing, you know, it's not for major yardage upside. I don't think I have any shares outside of dynasty leagues of Waddle at this point. I don't know if I buy it or not. I know the medicals were weird this year. Obviously, last year they were very weird. But even this year, it was a different year for medical evaluation. I mean, they did have most of those guys in Indy. I'm assuming he was there. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if he was actually in Indy for the medicals or not. So it is kind of weird that they would invest a pick in him, kind of knowing that he was really banged up. But, I mean, where there's smoke, there's certainly fire. I don't think we're going to see a lot of Waddle initially, but I do think we're going to see him, you know, at this during this season, like ramp up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That being said, at value where we're getting Fuller, it's just a no-brainer. He's the guy to target. If Parker falls, then I tend to go him.
Okay. One more that you really liked, and I don't want to keep talking about him because this is one of the ones you and I talked about last week where, you know, at some point these prices are going to be cost prohibitive. But that's Javonte Williams in this draft. RB 28. I mean, RB in 28 is later than I would take him off the board. My feelings on Williams and Michael Carter, but you put down Javonte Williams middle of the 7th round to Adam Ronis, RB 28. Right after him, Damian Harris and Trey Sermon again. Right before him were 3 quarterbacks: Cortland Sutton, Mike Davis, and Chase Edmonds. How high up? How many? Let's put it this way: how many running backs that went right in front of Javonte Williams would you have taken Williams over, Jeff?
Let's see. I guess probably the dividing spot would have been, making the decision of Carter or Williams. I would have went Williams instead of Carter because I do think the offense is going to be a little bit better, regardless of the messy quarterback situation. I think it's going to be better than what the Jets are going to be able to do in year one of that regime, in year one of Zach Wilson. So that would have been, it's not even a full round, but it's just kind of glaring to me that, Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, just because a guy looks like a value doesn't mean we should draft him. And I think that's an important thing to note here. Chase Edmonds, I don't think his role changes from last year. And a lot of what we're hearing out of, if you read between the lines, a lot of what we're hearing basically confirms that. James Conner comes in as the Kenyon Drake role. He's the bigger back. Chase Edmonds himself has said, I'm going to be on the sidelines in short yardage situations. So we're every week should we just start it now? Free Chase Edmonds? Are we going to say that every week? Or are we going to just realize that's his role in the offense? Mike Davis.
No,
I'll let you go.
Thing. I was going to say the James Conner thing I actually wrote about was a week and a half ago. It was ADPs I hate. And I brought up James Conner and Chase Edmonds because I said, if nothing else, it's a split backfield with James Conner as the lead heavy guy at the goal lines, which is the carries we want, and splitting half the touches. He's a better pass catcher than people give him credit for, despite the fact this is from somebody that was saying Edmonds was overlooked in the NFL draft. But I can also, like you, I said, I understand who Chase Edmonds is. And it's the same thing I said when he came out in the NFL draft. He's a complimentary running back. Let the testament of what the team tells you be an example. In the entire career, granted, it's a very short career, but it's 2 seasons where he's had multiple opportunities to be the quote-unquote guy. In these full 3 seasons, we'll even say full 2. We don't even include his rookie year. 2 seasons of Chase Edmonds. He's carried the ball more than 8 times, 3 times, 11, 25, and 27. And the 25 and 27 was once against the Giants. Everybody remembers that game. But they also had nobody, other people were hurt on top of that in that backfield besides Drake. It was they legitimately had nobody left. The Cardinals do not want him to be the guy. They want him to be the complementary piece. So I'm with you. I think they should be back-to-back. Conner and Edmonds, very close together. The gap is my biggest problem there. So I'm with you on that. I like Mike Davis a lot. That's the one where we did. Are we going to say, would you take him over Mike Davis, or are you just going to say you like the Mike Davis pick?
No, I actually don't like the ceiling of him. I'd rather have the ceiling of Javonte Williams, so I would have him above. But back to Edmonds real quick. Duke Johnson is a cautionary tale. I really think that for fantasy football purposes, we can't forget the lesson of Duke Johnson. How many pundits in the industry, and much respect to everybody else in the industry, but every year it was oh, this is the year, Duke Johnson. It's no, it isn't. No team views him as an early down back. I know. He's the all-time leader of rushing yards at the U. Nobody else was there when he was there. There was a long time where every year you were lucky enough to get 1 year as a starter at the U way back when. But he was too small. He's a cautionary tale. Giovanni Bernard is a cautionary tale. Chase Edmonds is in that vein. He is not a true 3-down guy. He's not David Johnson 2.0 for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think we should know that at this point. But yeah, Davis, to me, a guy who doesn't average over 4 yards per carry, it feels, I like, I'll take the overs on his rushing yards lines, but it feels like a low ceiling play. So I'm not knocking where he's going. I'm saying I would take Williams ahead of him, though.
Okay. And I don't have them that far apart. I would still take Davis for the volume. I would say this. If I was playing for the second half of the season, I would absolutely take Williams. But it's more over the course of the full season. Just a little bit of difference there. And I'm glad you said, the funny thing was when I started the whole point about Chase Edmonds, is I said Kristen Michael. And a different style running back, but it was the point of sometimes the fantasy world gets enamored with a player, and there's as you said, it was the free Chase Edmonds. It's oh, look at this play, and then Twitter's going crazy, and people in fantasy were if they would just let him do this, and it's all this hype and mind games of oh my god, he could be so good, and it's kind of like a groupthink echo chamber type of situation, and it ends up overvaluing who the player himself truly is. Hello, Jeff Janis. Remember Jeff Janis days?
Yeah,
that was fun for about 3 weeks.
So I have a name for that. They're called a Dave Matthews Band player. And here's why I call it that. So back when I was in college, this is the late 90s, it was a wild time. Everybody loved Dave Matthews Band. But you know what? I don't think everybody actually loved Dave Matthews Band. Well, okay, you get a pass, but I think that, where I went to school, people love Dave Matthews Band because their friends love Dave Matthews Band, right? They didn't. Nobody knows what that song Crash is about. That is a creepy song. If you actually listen to the words, the dude's stalking her. Like, it is a creepy, creepy, creepy song. I know the music's pretty and all, but it is creepy. But anyway, everybody loves Dave Matthews Band because their friends love Dave Matthews Band, but they don't really love Dave Matthews Band. They don't even know why they're saying they love Dave Matthews Band. I feel like that's like a Chase Edmonds, or you mentioned a quintessential Kristen Michael. We hear a couple people say they love them, and then, yes, I love them too. Like, and then everybody loves them. Dave Matthews Band players.
It's like that what you just had an example of Dave Matthews Band. It was, what is it, Tommy Boy, where they flipping through the radio station. He's like, you change it if you want to, and he's like, no, I don't. You change it if you want to, and then they just end up sitting there listening to the song and crying. Like, that's Dave Matthews Band. It's like, who put on Dave Matthews Band? I don't know, but I guess we'll just all listen to it. Yeah, like that's a really good comparison there. All right. Let's get negative for a little bit. Since we're crapping all over Dave Matthews Band, let's continue and close things out with some negativity here. So you said, now this is SuperFlex. So for everybody out there, this is one of the biggest strategies you can push on people, is whether to go quarterback or whether not to go quarterback. There are only 6 in the first round, and you say still too many quarterbacks in the first round, Jeff.
Yeah, I think there should be 3. I really think it should just be the top 3. I think the order is fine. I would have Rodgers ahead of Wilson, but it's really splitting hairs. But then when you look at where Rodgers went, I mean, it always comes back to, like, would you have taken Wilson if you knew this guy was going to be there? If these guys go a little bit further. So no, I think that 3 was the perfect number. I think an additional 3 or 4 in the second round. And then, you continue on from there. But yeah, too many quarterbacks for my taste. If I'm sitting there and I have the choice of Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson, I'm going Derrick Henry every single time, because I know that I can still make up ground. Like that team still, and that was Brandon Funston, I believe, still ends up with Joe Burrow. That could be your starting spot. You could have had Derrick Henry, and then, I mean, heck, if Aaron Jones falls in the second round, you got Derrick Henry and Aaron Jones. That's a huge start to your draft, and then you can make up ground at the position. I know not everybody subscribes to that idea, but it's something that I have done over the years that is quite successful. I would rather beat my opponents each week at the positions I start more of. So if I'm starting 2 quarterbacks, but I have 2 running backs, 3 wideouts, and a flex, that means 6 of those guys. And I'm not going to start a tight end in that spot. So I'm starting 3 times as many players in those spots as I am in my quarterback/superflex. So I would rather be better than my opponent in the spot where I'm starting more players, simply put. And I don't think if you have Mahomes he has Mahomes and Fitzpatrick. Is that much of an advantage over Stafford and Cousins? I don't think it is.
Yeah, that's certainly fair too. And that's part of also, again, reading the room, knowing that this is a quote unquote, I'm not even going to say the word, we'll call it analyst league, fantasy analyst league. And knowing that, inherently quarterbacks are pushed down in general. You can go back and look at the other snake draft, and, your home league might be a little bit different. So you might sit there and say, oh, no way, Jeff, there's going to be like 7 in my first round. But again, even if there are 7, you don't want to get stuck and have your top 2 quarterbacks, be Zach Wilson and, Cam Newton. Obviously, you don't want to push it that far. But to Jeff's point here is that even if 7, 8 go in the first round, that just means now you might be doing Dalvin Cook and Davante Adams at the turn or something like that. And now you can think about it in the 3rd or 4th round. So you don't always have to overreact, even though you can play the room at the same time. It's a delicate balance. Like I said, it's like playing poker in sports. All right, so last one before you get out of here. Tua at quarterback 16. I'm interested in this one because I feel like we might leave this show on a disagreement here, Jeff.
Tua at 16 is just too early for me. But I feel like a lot of the quarterbacks who went in that range, Tua, Lance, Fields, I guess they're fine there. But Daniel Jones at 20, Fitzpatrick might be a tick early. And it really comes down to the fact that Baker Mayfield, Matt Ryan, guys like that hung on the board a little bit too long. Like, if you say Tua or Matt Ryan, I'm going to go Matt Ryan. I'm going to make the much safer play. And Matt Ryan goes basically 2 rounds later. So I don't hate Tua. I think he is poised for a big step forward this year. But at the same time, I just don't like to reach for players. I really don't. I think it's a sacrifice of value.
So let me come back with this. So I actually have Tua at QB 17. Where do you have Tua in your rankings?
19.
19. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I can see you obviously your gap is a little bit bigger. So I'll be the positive one here. The real tick that I come from Tua on the positive side is that people forget. And I'm not saying you do. I'm just saying people. Last year was somebody who was coming off a major injury, and there was questions of whether or not he'd be able to play 100% last year. And this is something I just wrote up. Actually, he's in the last year's trash. He's the dumpster dive from last year because everybody's ticked off. And here's what I said, Jeff. Part of it was the Dolphins' fault. Part of it was that the Dolphins tried to straddle the fence. They tried to keep aspects of the Fitzpatrick offense because of Fitzpatrick's downfield ability and not fully committing to Tua, and then started to do this kind of hybrid-y, West Coasty type offense to kind of get Tua acclimated to his skill set, despite having a better deep ball than some people will give him credit for. By the way, if everybody forgot that game where he threw downfield to Jalen Waddle for that huge play that was the game-breaking play, yeah, that was Tua throwing that play. Or not to Waddle. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was to
Javonte Smith.
But anyway, so yeah, Devontae Smith too. No, there was another one. There was the Waddle play that I was thinking of. But point being is they straddle the fence. And when you straddle the fence in anything, in poker, sports, whatever it might be, you're costing yourself. You got to commit. You got to commit to one or the other. And that's where I'm saying is, like you mentioned, Will Fuller's here now. They drafted Waddle. They have an offense for Tua. I do think he can be significantly better this year. And to be honest with you, if he got near the top tier and is in like QB 12 or 13, I wouldn't be shocked.
I guess I wouldn't be shocked either. But in a 2-quarterback league, I don't want to really swing for the fences with that pick. So that's where, I didn't. Your strategy. Yeah, I had a hard time finding a lot of negative with it. So that's why I kind of focused on the quarterbacks here. Because, generally
that's
speaking.
What Steph said yesterday. Steph said this is the most boring draft ever. Like everybody did too good of a job.
That's what happens when you get people in a room who know what they're doing. Also, Jake, the fastest draft in human history, I think. This wasn't true. We didn't draft this online. If you're looking at this like, yes, you can see the results are in a league online. We drafted this in person, and there was at one point, we actually had to slow down because we were going to be done in an hour. A live draft in like 60 minutes. That's unbelievable.
It's so absurd. Jeff's 100% right. We were doing this live on Sirius XM, and I said, hey, we're going to take a break just to kind of like, break the pace and do that at the top of the hour when they take their longest break. And Jeff actually looked at me. He goes like, we only have like 3 rounds to go. I know, but we're going to try and pace it out. So yes, you could do live drafts super quick. We are the testament to it, especially if you're experienced people. But again, we'll tweet out the link for everybody. You can catch us at BetsTV on the YouTube channel, which subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up for the show so we can grow our audience and get more people out there. I don't care. As Jeff said, let your league mates learn. You still know more because you've been here since day one, and you have to manage your own team and learn from us. So at theathletic.com/BetsTV gets you the free month. And we'll be back. Like I said, 5 stars on the iTunes if that's where you're listening in all those good places. So we'll be back again next Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all in football on BetsTV. We love you guys. See you later.